oftentimes when we're being told to be good, it means be small, be quiet, put others first, be polite, like all of these things that you just start to collapse with, oh, well, if I'm going to be good and loved and valuable and worthy, I have to put others first.
Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to the Worthy Mother podcast. Today, we are going to be talking all about good girl conditioning and really breaking free from those perfectionism and people-pleasing tendencies that so many of us women, so many of us mothers really kind of fall into a pattern of just like living by. And this is something that has been super relevant in my life. I was kind of that poster child good girl, growing up. And as an adult, I've really come to realize how much seeing myself as somebody who was supposed to be just good has really impacted my own personal development and getting to know myself and understanding like where I fit in this world. And that's been really interesting navigating that through motherhood as well. And so I'm just really excited to get into this conversation, just be really explicit about talking about the conditioning that we kind of receive growing up that can lead to that. So joining us today is Carley Weissert. She is an empowerment coach on a mission to help women reconnect with their authentic selves and create lives that they can't get enough of. So Carley, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here and finally be having this conversation. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what the work is that you do?
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I love talking about this stuff. So, I'm Carley. I am a mom. I've got two little girls. They are 6 and 8. So I've got a kindergartner and a second grader. I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been coaching for like almost 2 years or so. I don't know. It's kind of blurry because I was doing it before I like really owned that I was doing it. So, the lines blur. But yeah, I love working with women in like one-on-one coaching settings around everything we're talking about today: good girl conditioning, people pleasing, perfectionism, because I lived all of it for so much of my life. And like, quite frankly, the patterns run deep. So like, it's still something that I am constantly putting attention on and being intentional about and practicing because, I became aware of all of my own bullshit, basically. Like, I don't know, within the past 2 or 3 years, but I've got like 3.5 decades of it all under my belt. So it takes time to work through it. So I'm kind of right there alongside my clients working through all of my own stuff, which makes it a really fun experience for me because I get to learn and grow right alongside them.
Yeah, I think that's something that having this podcast and talking about a lot of societal expectations for moms and conditioning that we all have faced and we can kind of start to unlearn, that's a really big piece of it is the fact that for most of us, a lot of those messages and conditioning that we've had is like decades of stuff just kind of piling on. And so, yes, we can start to be aware of that and we can start to be intentional on making decisions that are kind of against the conditioning and unlearning and things like that. But we have to give ourselves so much grace in that process because it's unrealistic to assume that we could just snap our fingers, get rid of everything that's made us who we are over this life we've lived, right? There's so much to it. So I think that's a really good lens to go into the conversation with because, I mean, if we're perfectionists, if we identify as somebody who has tried to reach a standard of perfection, it can be just as easy to say, why am I still getting caught up in these images of what it means to be this good person, what it means to be a good mom, what it means to be, somebody who makes others happy. And it's like we can kind of fall back into those perfectionist patterns and
Yeah.
try and strive for that. It's like a cycle. So we have to be aware that that's not the goal, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. In my experience, as you start to bust through those patterns and recognize them and stuff, they just get sneakier and they like
hmm
come in the back door and it's like, oh shit, I'm still doing the thing. It's just showing up differently. So, and I had a call with a client before this recording and literally had the same thing of like, okay, now we see the pattern and that's amazing. You've got beautiful self-awareness and now you can interrupt the pattern. And you've got to give yourself so much grace and so much compassion because this pattern is like decades old and this self-awareness is like a few months in the making. So like you're gonna stumble and fumble and go dip back into those patterns a lot, but having the awareness is the first step. So conversations like this help bring things into awareness.
Yeah. So can you kind of just break down for us what are we talking about when we say good girl conditioning? And like how does that become a part of our lives from childhood? How does it show up in our adult lives?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think good girl conditioning kind of is like the umbrella, like
Hmm.
under which like people pleasing and perfectionism and things like that live. But God, it starts so young. Like, and it's something that I am as mindful as I can with my own kids. But like so many of us as women are like, oh, be a good girl. Like literally, we're just told that explicitly growing up. And oftentimes when we're being told to be good, it means be small, be quiet, put others first, be polite, like all of these things that you just start to collapse with, oh, well, if I'm going to be good and loved and valuable and worthy, I have to put others first. I have to like be quiet, be small, all of these things. And then you carry that with you, or I carried that with me at least. And then you turn into an adult and you're like, oh my God, who am I? What's going on? Like, something feels off. Like, it's just this. I had kind of created this whole person that I thought was me because it was all just like unconscious. I didn't know any different. It was just, oh, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing, meeting people's expectations, checking the boxes, doing all the things. And I was really good at them. I joke like I was the goodest girl. I had it nailed. But then I've always loved personal development work. And as I kind of found the feminine flavor of it in the early days of COVID, I kind of realized like, what do I want? And what are my desires? And who am I? And like, how did I get here? Do I want this life that I created because I thought that I did? Because everyone else was telling me how good and great it was. And everyone else around me was so happy and pleased with the choices I was making. I was like, I actually like this feels a little off. Like there was a little whisper inside of me. And eventually, because I kept doing more and more inner work, she kept getting louder and louder, that whisper, until it got to the point of like, I can't. It got more uncomfortable to stay in this cushy, comfortable life that I had created than to just be like, I'm done. I'm burning it all down and I'm starting over because it just doesn't work for me anymore.
I'm curious if we can talk a little bit more about that. What kind of the result of living by this type of conditioning and making decisions in life, like setting yourself up for this perfect life that you've envisioned and that you're like supposed to want, and then you're able to like do the right things and get it. What kind of that looks like, maybe in your life, what that's looked like, and then for women you've worked with, where do they end up where they get to a point where it's like, wait, this isn't what I want?
Yeah. Well, for my experience, it was, I mean, I had this perfect on paper from the outside looking in, like would make anybody jealous kind of life. Like very like American dream, beautiful home, two little girls, a golden doodle, like all of the things. It was like a Hallmark movie or something. So it looked great, but I had spent so much of my time and effort and energy, again, unconsciously for so long creating this thing that looked really good, it actually didn't feel good on the inside. And I didn't even realize it until I like kind of became awake to it. And I was like, I like actually kind of feel unfulfilled and like there's this like something missing or like unaligned. It's like a coachy jargony word, but like it's just really that's what it was. It was misaligned. And I just felt this itch almost for something different. And accompanied with that was so much guilt and so much shame for wanting something different than what I had. Because what I had looked really good. And it really, I didn't have this miserable, terrible existence by any means. It wasn't that at all. But it was something that I created for this version of myself that actually wasn't my authentic self. So, yeah, just this unsettledness, this like craving for something different. And that like is an experience that I've heard from other women too of like this just doesn't feel right or like how did I get here or like very
Mm.
kind of like going through the motions stuck on this hamster wheel kind of energy or like really like just feeling burnt out because it's been go, 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 do, making all these other people happy and never pausing. Like that was something for me. I never once in my whole life paused and stopped long enough to slow down and tune in to like my body. Because in my head, my mind, like everything logically made sense. I was killing it up there. But like to drop into my gut, into my heart and be like, is this actually what I want? It never even occurred to me to do that. And when I finally learned what now sounds like such a simple thing, when I did that, I was like, I don't actually want this. And it was so scary to admit. So there's a lot of like fear and anxiety and doubt that comes up for women who are kind of waking up to their own conditioning because it's unknown territory. It's brand new. And like you're looking in the rear view of like, but wait, I like built all this. I spent all this time and all this energy. And there are all these people that a choice by
Mhm.
me will be impacted by and stuff. So it's no small thing. So there's a lot of yeah, guilt, doubt, fear, like that burnt out, like resentments too, of like just living in people pleaser mode all the time and not putting yourself first or like even on the list at all sometimes. So yeah, that's a whole world.
It's really interesting as you're saying that. Something that's coming forward for me, and I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast about how I think the time that I became a mom, like when it was in my life, how that has impacted my own journey to get to a place where like I'm working with moms to kind of understand the societal pressures and this perfect mother that we're all trying to be, even if we aren't aware of it. And as you're saying this, I kind of see for myself, I had my first kid at 23. I wasn't married. I was going to school to become a teacher. It was kind of the first time in my life that it was like, okay, this isn't this narrative that, everyone must expect from me. My second grade teacher must expect that I'm gonna like grow up and be this perfect adult. And it's not like I had judgment from the outside. My family like we're like, cool, like this is happening. It's, I wasn't getting this explicit judgment that I think some people do get. But even still, it was like, okay, I'm not living up to this quote, good girl that I've always thought I was. And I think I'm okay with that. And that kind of gave me the pause to kind
Mhm.
of look at my life and what I was doing. And, after getting my teaching credential and teaching for a few years, it really set me on this path of like questioning it all. Like, am I just doing all of this because it's stable and easy and what I'm supposed to be doing? And that's brought me in all of this to where I'm at now, where I'm still learning, I'm still figuring it out. But I really had the opportunity because of something that just happened where I was like, hey, I'm no longer on this path. And that's a good thing. And I think for so many women, like you said, we don't necessarily have that moment to pause. It's not just given to us, it's not just in front of our face. And so we have to be intentional and we have to know that the conversation is out there. Like we can say, okay, something doesn't feel right with this, even though everything is right, even though everything is right compared to like what I thought this was supposed to be, I'm not feeling fully satisfied. And our brains go to this place of like, well, I should feel fully satisfied. And I feel guilty that I don't feel fully satisfied. Like, what does that mean about me as a mom, right? When we have kids, it's like, why is this not everything? It should be. And then there's so
Mhm.
much shame with that. And if we're not aware that we're allowed to like stop and question and say, what do I want? Like, what feels good? What is aligned? Then we can just sit in that place of this doesn't feel like enough, but it should be. So, okay, just going to keep going with it. So I just think
Yeah.
it is so important the work that you're doing to really like interject that cycle and say, let's pause, let's talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I love that you had that like that pivot kind of like
Mm-hmm.
put into your lap for you because it to your point, like that doesn't happen for a lot of people. Like they just keep kind of blindly going down the path or climbing up the ladder or whatever it is. That was very much what I
Yeah.
was. I will say, like, I feel like COVID probably acted like that for a lot because that was kind of,
Yeah.
it was a little bit of just synchronicities and timing, but like life just totally halted. Like there was a global pause for a minute there. And that's kind of when things really started to come to a head for me, or like the ball started to get rolling. But yeah, and granted, I have zero regrets at all. But like even inside of motherhood, like it was just like, okay, like I went to college and I graduated and I met my husband and we got married and then we had kids and it was just like this is what we do. Like I didn't really pause to be like, okay, is motherhood actually the right choice for me? Now, I've got two beautiful little girls, like everything's great. And then even when I was starting to really look at all of my good girl stuff and the people pleasing and realizing like, okay, actually like this life is not what I actually want. I thought I did, but now that I am my true self is starting to come online, she's not totally on board for what we've signed up for. And I was terrified. Something that really slowed me down for a while was the fact that I was a mom and I had two little girls, and I wanted to do what was best for them. And then selfishly was also terrified of the judgment that I would get from people, or like I'm divorced. And so that was kind of like this big, like, do I or don't I like move forward with this? And I was so scared to tell my family, and they were all great about, of course, questions, surprise, but like overall supportive and great. But was so worried about what people were going to think of me as a woman and as a mom. And I was so scared of the impact it was going to have on my children. And ultimately, what actually got me kind of like over that final hump, it was the girls again, in that I want them to know that it's okay to change your mind. Even when it comes to really big, scary things, you're always allowed to change your mind, because I want them to honor themselves first and foremost above anything else. And I can't expect them to do that if I'm not going to do it myself. So when I kind of had that like lock into place, it's like, okay, it's time to
Yeah.
take a scary step. And it's a lesson that I don't think will really sink in for them until much later in their lives. And that's okay. But yeah, it's just funny because my kids kind of slowed me down at first. And then they were the thing that pushed me over the edge to make the choice to flip my life upside down.
It's so interesting thinking about how, in so many ways, I think the conditioning just transfers right into motherhood, especially you think about like what society perceives the role of women, right? Like it's kind of synonymous with like you're a woman, you're a mother. And there's question if somebody is a woman who does not want to be a mother or who is not a mother. And while we can like logically say, okay, no, that is something that's really prevalent in society, sometimes very explicitly. I mean, I don't know if you saw what just came out with Harrison Butker, and I know when this will be coming out much further down the road, but like these messages exist very explicitly in society, but then also kind of just as an undertone. And so it's really easy then for that conditioning just to kind of transfer right over. You have kids and now you're expected to be a good mom, and there's like certain things you're supposed to do as a mother, including being self-sacrificial and all these things, right? To be good enough. And so I'm curious then, because what you're saying is that yes, the motherhood did slow you down in listening to what you wanted, but it also then gave you this opportunity to have a new reason too. And I'm just curious, with women you work with, what you see the role of motherhood playing in this journey, just across the board, maybe differences for different women. Obviously, not all women are mothers, but
Yeah, no, it's such a like ubiquitous thing, kind of like, okay, I mean, woman and mother are sometimes, to your point, very explicitly just collapse, like they are
mhm.
one and the same. But then even in just inside of motherhood, like to be a good mom is to be self-sacrificing, like you said, like it's supposed to be hard. You're supposed to put yourself last. You're supposed to be burnt out and tired and just need to like have wine at the end of the day to unwind and all. Like it's just so normal that no one ever pauses to question of like, okay, but actually, like, is that how it's supposed to be? Does it have to be that way? And no, it doesn't. I firmly believe that it does not. But that's something that's so common in the women that I talk to who are moms, of like, I have to put myself last to be a good mom. And it's a hard, like the hard patterns to shake and to interrupt, because there is just the cultural, societal stuff, all the undertones. And then generationally, like so many of us, myself included, like I witnessed my mom just like run herself ragged for us all through childhood, that it was just like, it's like, oh, that's just what moms do. Like we'd get her like, a card on Mother's Day and celebrate her birthday and like a little Christmas gift. But like that was it. Like she was never, no attention was ever put on her. She never did anything to really take care of herself. And was really, as I learned as I got older, like so unfulfilled and so resentful and all of these things. And I started to see some of that showing up in my own life and my own parenting and mothering. I was like, I'm no, like, nope, unsubscribe. I'm not doing this. So yeah, it's really common because it's so ingrained and drilled in of like, well, good moms, you put yourself last, and you can't pour from an empty cup. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, because you really can't. And because I have intentionally chosen to prioritize myself, then it ripples out into my life and into my parenting. And I can be a better mom. I can show up better when I'm taking care of myself. And there are still days when life gets in the way and I don't. Those are the days that I'm so much faster to snap at my kids or to like be grumpy or whatever. But when I am taking care of me, I'm such a better mother. And I think that gets lost in the conversation. Or there's this like, okay, like really like some like kind of eye rolling and like distrust of like, wait, you're telling me that it's a good thing to put myself first? Like, that's so selfish. Like, it's like a bad word. Like, oh my God. But the putting themselves at the bottom of the list is very common for, I mean, it is a woman thing, but it's really a mom thing. So I see
Yeah.
that.
It's like one of those things that we've been training for our whole lives, and then you become a mom and it's like time to go. And it is interesting. And it's exciting that like the conversation has changed somewhat, where like we are having these conversations and you see in our generation people making different choices and thinking about how that then will impact the future generations, right? Like it is exciting to know that these patterns can be stopped, at
Mhm.
least somewhat, right? And that's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, because it can be like diving into any kind of inner work, healing journey, all of it, it can be really exhausting at times. And like, oh my God, there's more and there's more. And like, there's no place to get to with a
Mhm.
healing path. Like, once you're kind of on the train, it just keeps going on forever. It's hard to hop off of it. But it is really an empowering like shift to be like, okay, I'm not even just doing this for myself. I'm doing this for my kids and my grandkids and generations to come. And it's so worth like the discomfort and maybe even some of like the pain and stuff that comes up when looking at what needs to be healed within ourselves and our own wounds and triggers and patterns and all of that. But it's worth it because it benefits our kids and our grandkids. I mean, it benefits them down the road, but it also benefits them inside of our relationship right now and
Mhm.
our dynamic right now and inside of our families. And my quality of life is so much better because I'm doing all this work. So it's been hard at moments, but it's been so worth it. And it's funny because even as I'm talking, I'm like, I don't want it to be like, oh, well, you should do this. You should do inner work it before for your kids. Like, no, do it for
Mhm.
you. And then your kids get to benefit. But it's just funny. Like, even in my speaking, I can hear like, oh yeah, it's so great for them, which is true, but like, do it for you.
Yeah, it's like both. Both are
Yes.
important, but like we can do things for ourselves. That's a really hard place, I think, for a lot of people to get to, a lot of women to get to, but like just saying it, like you can do it for yourself and your kids will benefit and the world will benefit. But like it's okay to do it for you.
100%. It needs to be a t-shirt or something.
Yeah. Good merch idea. So when it comes to kind of unlearning the conditioning, undoing the conditioning, I know obviously like that's the work that you do. And like you said, it's never ending work. It's just work that we continue doing because it's going to keep showing up in your life in different ways. And I'm wondering if there's any tips you have for somebody who is looking at their life and maybe feeling unfulfilled or maybe knowing that they need to start thinking about what they actually want but aren't sure how to start kind of undoing that conditioning. What would you say? What advice do you have?
Yeah. Something that has been really impactful for me and that I like to work with women on if they're open and available for it, obviously, but it's inner child work. Because so much of this goes all the way back to when, I mean, back to the beginning of the conversation, like, oh, be a good girl. Like it starts when we are little, and a lot of these things get ingrained very young. And the patterns stick around because they keep us or our inner little girl feeling safe and loved and all of these things. And if we start to break those patterns and speak our truth and speak our mind and uphold boundaries and say no and things that are very normal, healthy human behaviors, the little girl starts to freak out because she's like, no, if I do that, then they won't like me and they won't love me and I won't get attention and like all of these things. So it's giving her attention and reassurance. And whether that's through journaling prompts or some meditations, visualizations, there's lots of like ways that you can do it, whether it's in a guided setting with a coach or on your own, but giving some love and attention to your inner child and finding out like, okay, well, what does she think? What does she believe? Why are we doing this? Because everything that a human does, there's a reason for it. Somewhere, sometimes you might have to dig a little bit, but there's always a reason. Because my adult self knows that, like, of course I'm allowed to say no and not do something I don't want to do. Like in my brain, I'm like, that's why are we talking about this? That's so obvious. But then my emotionally or like my body will get like I tense up and I get contracted, my throat closes up and I like panic at the thought of saying no to someone. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Like I'm not actually in danger right now, but it feels like I am. So what's going on? And that's where the inner child work is really helpful because in my experience personally, like those feelings of like fear and oh no are less and less frequent and less intense, but they still kind of show up. But now I know I'm like, okay, I like, I mean, it sounds a little crazy, but I'm basically just having conversations with myself in my head of like, we're okay, we're safe, everything's fine. Like just talking to my little girl, or like maybe she's a teenager or whatever. Like that's part of like the details of figuring out like what part of you needs the love and attention. But that is super helpful and impactful. And then something, because at least I know for me, when I was starting to kind of realize I don't even know who I am, I was like, I don't even know what I want or what, like, I would be in programs, like, what do you desire? I'm like, great question. I don't know. Like, so it was really getting connected back into my body because our bodies are so wise. They communicate with us all the time. And I had just unplugged basically from my body. But simple exercises of getting really clear on what a yes and a no feels like in your body. Because sometimes it can be like someone's asking you something. You're like, I actually don't like, I don't know what the true answer is for me. Am I a yes or am I a no? And you can start to figure that out with like super simple, basic things of like literally asking yourself, like, is my name Carley? Yes. Like questions where you know the answer is yes and you know the answer is no, and start to just notice. And it's going to be subtle at first. It's going to feel really weird, but the more you do it, you practice and you can just start to tune in with like, oh, when it's no, like I feel some like fluttering in my stomach or like tightness in my shoulders, or when it's a yes, I feel this like wave of like calm. Like you just start to pick up on it and then you can apply that to bigger questions and things like that. So those are probably my two big things is inner child work and then little like yes no exercises, which you can totally do on your own, and it's always great to be supported by someone. I have been in containers with coaches at the group settings or one-on-one settings for like, I don't know, it's 2024, like 3.5 years straight, and it's been some of the best choices I've made for myself.
Yeah, that like pattern interruption and having the accountability and the support to help you like notice when you are not listening to yourself and kind of help you get to a point where you are. I think that can be really huge. And I think both of those pieces of advice really do come back to learning to listen to yourself. And I think that is something that is part of kind of the conditioning. And when we're people pleasing, we're not listening to ourselves. We're doing things what we think is going to make others happy. And so a lot of us have really not developed the skill of listening to ourselves and really in some ways developed the skill of not listening to ourselves. You said unplugged. It's like we become really disconnected. And so anything to like intentionally reconnect and like check in is huge. And I think like the inner child healing too, it's like it brings us right back to the like it's okay to prioritize you. If you think about that, you think about how you want to prioritize your kids and you want them to like know their value and their worth. When you can look at yourself in that light, it's really huge in saying, okay, well, I deserve that too.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very like full circle moment, especially as a mom of like, okay, this is how I want to parent my kids. So then let me give that to myself. And sometimes it's easier to give yourself that same like love and attention and grace and compassion when you're thinking of yourself as a kid instead of as the adult version of yourself, which is a whole nother conversation because we should be able to give it to ourselves in any form. But for people who struggle with it, that's a good like stepping stone of like, okay, maybe I struggle to give it to adult me, but little girl, like 5-year-old me or 10-year-old me or whatever, like that's easier to pour love into. So it's a good stepping stone.
Yeah. So, something that I love talking about at the end of each episode is self-care, specifically self-care for moms, taking care of ourselves, making sure our needs are getting met, and just making that just normal, like normalizing taking care of ourselves. So, I would love to ask you how you take care of yourself and if you have any tips for moms just to make sure that that's a regular part of their lives as well.
Yeah, I am a bit of a self-care junkie. I love it. Proudly proclaim. But for me personally, I not every morning because kids, but most mornings I give myself space to meditate. I do like guided meditations that are like 10 minutes long, nothing too crazy. And for me, movement, whether it's like lifting weights or going to yoga or just getting outside and walking now that the weather is nicer, is really important. That just helps move energy for me and just get me out of my head and into my body. And then just little things that bring me joy just for the sake of bringing me joy. Like they're pleasurable and that's the only reason I'm doing it, because I like it. Like reading fiction books or I've been on a puzzle kick lately. I've been doing puzzles and like things that aren't scrolling on my phone, because don't get me wrong, I do that, but like after getting sucked into like an hour of TikTok scrolling, I leave and I don't necessarily feel filled up. But if I get to like curl up with a book and read a chapter with like, a kombucha or a tea or something, like I feel so good after. And part of it is because I enjoy it. And part of it is because I know I'm taking care of myself. So yeah, I weave it in lots of ways for sure. But I think especially for mothers, my biggest piece of advice probably is depending on the stage of motherhood you're in, I suppose, like you kind of have to weave it into pockets of your day. You may not have the spaciousness to block off an hour every day for like a candlelit bubble bath with your favorite book or whatever. Like that might not be in the cards for you at this stage, but you probably can, on your way to pick up a kiddo from daycare, like blast your favorite song and just sing along and let loose. Or even like just making tasks that you have to be doing already 10% more pleasurable. So when you're folding laundry, listening to a podcast you really enjoy or some music, or if you have like the flexibility of being able to take a call for work while going on a walk, or just like kind of habit stacking in a way, like with pleasure. But that's probably when I have days that I know are a little more jam packed, I just kind of weave in little moments of things because I know I don't have the luxury of like doing whatever I want all day long on that particular day. And I also know, back to what I mentioned before, of like if I'm not pouring into myself at all, my kids are going to be, I mean, not just my kids, but the people in my life, but my kids are there a lot. They're going to be like on the receiving end of me, like being grumpy and grouchy because I didn't take care of myself. So that helps motivate me too, to do the things that I know I love, because I want to show up as best I can for them. And I kind of fooled myself for a while thinking that I could just do that constantly and not be pouring back into me. And of course that didn't work. And then I was beating myself up because I wasn't, like, it was just this really terrible downward spiral. So now that I prioritize myself, even if it's like 10 minutes a day, if that's all it is, it helps. So weaving it into the pockets is probably my biggest piece of advice for mamas.
Yeah, that's huge. And I always love the thought of like, yeah, listen to the podcast, the audiobook while you're doing something else as just a simple way to start because it really does make a difference. If you can't find the extra time, then like make whatever you're already doing just a little bit more fun,
Yeah,
a little bit more pleasurable. And then, of course, know that the more time you pour into yourself, the more like you give to yourself, the better.
absolutely.
Carley, where can listeners find you? What should they be looking for?
Yeah, so I am most active on Instagram. My handle is just my name at Carley Weissert. I try and post there pretty regularly. I've got a little link tree set up. I offer free 45-minute coaching calls, and I've got a freebie on there right now. There's a couple of them, but the most recent one is called the ABCs of Transformation. It's this little e-workbook that I made and goes through the whole alphabet and has a definition, a practice, and a journal prompt for each letter with like different words that you kind of often hear thrown around in the coaching world, but might not fully understand what they mean or what they are. And it's very sassy and snarky, and it was super fun to make. And it's free. So go download that if you want to do a little bit of work on your own time. And feel free to get in touch on Instagram.
Amazing, super fun stuff. And that sounds like a really awesome ebook. I'm gonna have to go check that out.
I'm very proud of it. I brag, I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you should. Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. This was such an awesome conversation and one that I think will be really impactful for a lot of moms out there.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I agree. I think it's so important for women, especially moms. I could talk about it all day long.
Yeah. And for everybody tuning in, you are worthy, mama.